Thank you all for coming. This is, Frank, an amazing occasion to me to see all the faces that are out here, the dignitaries who I'll introduce, members of the press. It's terrific. Okay, really appreciate that. For those of you that have been in my meetings before when we did them live, you'll recall that I tried to promote civil discourse. And as we ask questions at the end of the meeting of our guests, I'd appreciate you being respectful in your questions or how they're presented, as this is as important to developing the reputation for our communities as it is for getting answers to the questions. So please, please, please. The only meetings we've run live from Politics and Culture since COVID was we had a terrific 5-part series done by Don Price on James Madison and the Constitution. And the few that did attend that, I think, got a lot out of it, because it was very interesting. You know, we think of Jefferson and all that kind of stuff. But really the father of who our written Constitution is, or arguably our country, was really James Madison, and that was pretty interesting. I got into it being much easier to do virtual meetings, doing our town halls, and I'm lazy, and so that's good, and that's why you had a lot of them. That's why we haven't had many public meetings. We will have more. We've got the water department coming in next month, and you'll see me asking questions. I'm sorry, yeah, no. And questions are going, he's ready to field questions, everything from what's safe to put the guy on the garbage disposal to how good is our water in Durham, you know, what's that pink stuff, what's that black stuff. You know, he's prepared for all that, and I'll be asking you questions on that. We're not going to get into full sessions of live performances until after the election, because we have a really short window. The final filing for candidates is July 21st. And I won't know how many candidates we have until after July 21st. And since the early primaries start September 15th, that's a lot of virtual town halls in a very small period of time. For those of you that have not attended one of these virtual town halls, I encourage you to do so. This is the opportunity for the candidates to hear your questions and for you to hear their responses. And the way these are done is I moderate it, and I ask a question to one candidate, and then I ask the same question to the other candidate so you can understand the contrast. I then reverse them. So whoever got the second question gets that question first the next time. So we try and be completely fair and try to promote with a small d what democracy is all about. So if you haven't been to our virtual town halls, when you see the notices coming up near the end of July, I encourage you to attend. Tonight's meeting is about the plans for our local state-owned roads in Southeast Durham. That is the agenda for today. It's being presented to you by Carolina Arbors Politics and Culture Club and the Leesville Road Coalition. I'd like to announce some of our guests, if I may. I'm going to first ask for those people who are going to address you tonight to stand up. There's Senator Mike Woodard. Mike, thank you. Representative Zack Hawkins from NCDOT. From NCDOT, Brandon Jones. And from the DCHC MPO, M-I-C-K-Y, anyway, Doug Plachcinski. And now, if we can, for all of you, thank you very much. We have a number of people here from our city council. This is a very impressive list. I'd first like to introduce, and please give them applause because they're giving their time, budgeting process and all that kind of stuff. First to our mayor, Elaine O'Neill. Mark Anthony Middleton, our mayor pro tem, said he was coming. Maybe he'll come a little bit later. Do you know if he's, you don't know? Okay. And a member of the MPO and councilperson Leonardo Williams. He's on his way. Oh, okay. So Leonardo will be here. Woohoo! That's good. And the person that just answered for Leonardo is Javiera Caballero, a member of the city council and a member of the MPO, and councilperson Monique Hosley Hyman. Please stand up for Monique. And then we have the leadership of the Leesville Road Coalition, Steve Nill, who co-founded the group with me. Stephen? He's in the back. There's Stephen. Oh, Mark Anthony. Come on up. So we can now applaud his priestly. I want to say to you that in our very first town hall we had. I did do Shakespearean acting in high school. We didn't have indoor plumbing or electricity, so I had to learn how to project. Anyway, Mark Anthony Middleton, along with Steve Schull, were the first politicians I met from Durham. Welcome into Carolina Arbors. Back to the coalition. Lisa Scott. Is Kim Parks here? I didn't see Kim. Oh, unfortunately, she's not here. Pam Andrews, I didn't see either. Okay. Pam Williams. Pam Williams is here. And from the Inter-Neighborhood Council, Benita Green, who's, well, you'll hear more about that as the months progress. We also have from the media, from CBS, Ben Brokum. Are you here, Ben? He said he'll attend. He interviewed me. I and Steve Nill are on the 6 o'clock news tonight announcing about this meeting. So he should be here. Richard Stradling. Richard, I know you're here. Richard from the News and Observer. Carl Kenny. Carl, are you here? Nope. Okay, he's not here either. I'm amazed, and I have to tell you, I came to Durham from Buffalo to Boston to LA to New York. I'm not used to having this kind of response from our elected officials, from the press. This is really a tribute to the community and frankly to all of you who show such great interest in what's going on in Durham. It's a terrific community and it's due to these people. Okay, so let's go on. I've done all of that. Okay, so there are really two agenda items for our meeting tonight. One is Leesville Road. Not surprisingly, that's why our organization got its name. It's a state road that is not under active consideration to improve traffic flow. The most recent outlook in a meeting that Stephen and I had with a DOT from the city and NCDOT was that the earliest it might happen would be 2045. Now understand, there is no plan. That was just the earliest because I was looking for a summary statement. Are you going to have something about your matrix of how you decide what gets fixed? Great. Okay, so you'll understand why that's the case during this presentation. The second big issue is Highway 70. It's a state road that has been planned to connect 885 with 540 with limited access highway. The plans are now up in the air as there are differing points of view between DCHC MPO, that stands for, ready? Durham, Chapel Hill, Caballero, Metropolitan Planning Organization, and the DOT. So tonight we're going to see what are those differences and hopefully the rationale for why. Our agenda, I was supposed to spend 5 minutes, I'm a little bit over. Then we're going to have opening remarks from Senator Woodard, and I just want to spend a minute because this meeting would not have happened without Senator Woodard. He's the one that contacted NCDOT. He's the one that allowed me to invade his office space for about 2 hours and then took me to lunch. And so, thank you, Mike Woodard. And then Representative Zack Hawkins, who is simply one of the most real human beings I've ever met in my life. I mean, just amazing. I'm putting him up on a plane next to Deidreana Freeman, which is rare place. So they will each spend about 5 minutes in opening remarks. Then we'll have a presentation from Brandon Jones for 25 minutes on NCDOT's plans, and then we will have the director of the DCHC MPO, Doug Plachcinski, speaking, and after that, we're going to ask Mike and Zack and Doug and Brandon to come up here And Kim is going to have a microphone going one side of the room, and I'll have the other microphone going down the other side of the room. And if you have your hands up, we're going to give you the microphone and say, ask a question. So that's our program. Okay, please be respectful. Again, these people are giving of their time. This is not an easy subject matter to deal with. So please, with that, Senator Woodard. Yeah, please.
Okay, maybe you can hear me. Good evening. My name's Mike Woodard, and it is my great honor to serve as your North Carolina State Senator. I've been in the legislature 11 years, and for 7 years before that, I served on the Durham City Council. Surprised Herman said that Mark Anthony was the first Durham politician he met, because I thought I was. And I remember when we had the town hall out here many years ago. I was with Mayor Bell a little earlier today, and he knew I was coming tonight. We were reminiscing about when we approved this project on the Durham City Council. So I remember this was all woods, and we approved this. So I'm just so excited and delighted how Carolina Arbors has advanced and become just such a vibrant community. And I guess the first couple of town halls I came to, Herman, didn't have nearly this many people. One, I know we were talking about redistricting, a less interesting topic than this that's very impactful. I'm just happy to say that, well, y'all know Herman, so you know how persistent Herman is. And he's gotten to know my assistant very well, because if I'm not responding as quickly as Herman likes, he's burning up Carol's phone to make sure that I do respond. But I'm glad this really started with a conversation we had back, I guess, leading up to last fall's legislative elections, but we agreed we would wait till after the election and put this all together. Herman and I had conversation. I'm just so happy that Brandon Jones, our Division 5 engineer, has been a great partner in working on this. And I'm so happy to see our city officials here as well, because some of the decisions at least start at the local level. I really don't have a lot to say tonight. I really came with 2 ears and 1 mouth, so I'm going to close my mouth soon so that we can listen to the concerns and questions that you all have. But let me just say, by way of intro, I just violated, so I am going to say something real quick. You all chose to live here because this is an incredible community to live in. And as you all know, we have 20 to 30 people a day who come here because they agree with us that Durham and the Research Triangle Park is an amazing place to live. That presents for us many opportunities, but also incredible challenges. Having served in elected office now for 18 years, I think I understand a lot of those fairly well, and want to work with our great partners at the state government, but also my incredible colleagues who serve you on the Durham City Council and on the Durham County Commissioners to make this better for you. So I stand ready to work with you all on the whole myriad issues that are affecting here Southeast Durham, and look forward to our conversation tonight and our ongoing dialogue. Thank you again for having us, and thank you all for being here tonight.
Well, Zack is coming up.
He said it all.
Well, what else is new, right?
That's right. That's right.
But I do want to mention that Brenda Howerton and Wendy Jacobs sent their regrets that they couldn't be here tonight. There is a county commission meeting tonight, so they couldn't be here. But trying to get all of NCDOT, these guys here, because it's a legislative session, in case you read the newspaper, but to try and get everyone here, we just had to make our picks of who we could. But at any rate, Professor Hawkins.
Well, thank you, and always glad to follow my senator, Mike Woodard, and we have Senator Natalie Murdoch too. I think they sort of split this side of town. Good to see my city colleagues, and thank you. Wow, it is a full house tonight. I remember coming in 2018 when I was first running for the North Carolina House, and it was always great discussion. So I am proud to be your representative. I serve all of East Durham, all of RTP, with a little bit of Morrisville that sits in Durham County. And we are the fastest growing part of North Carolina. We are the economic engine of the state of North Carolina. And I'm proud to make sure not only do we provide the resources, but most importantly, take care of the business in the state of North Carolina. Now, some days that is tough if you're following the news, but we're in there every single day bringing a Durham spirit, and the folks that send us here, which are you, to make sure that North Carolina moves forward. In addition to transportation, which Mike and I, have a chance the opportunity to serve on, we're focusing also on education because we want to make sure that students are maximizing their God-given potential in the great state of North Carolina. But secondly, that little place called RTP needs workers. And so developing a strong workforce that allows people to have a sustaining wage so they can feed their families and they can live in the city and the county of Durham. That is most important to us. But one thing that I share with my colleagues across the state is I'm not sure if your constituencies are as loud and as vocal and as organized as mine. And that's the truth. Durham is one of the smartest places on the planet, and they believe in democracy, big D or little d. And they want to make sure their voices are heard, and that's why you're here tonight. And so I'm excited for the conversation. Transportation is something that is critical to a place like us that's growing. The Triangle, North Carolina, I think is supposed to go from number 9 to number 7 in the next 20 years in U.S. population. That means a lot of people, a lot more neighbors. And so I'm glad that you're involved so we can hear from you. When we have our transportation meetings, we can carry that work forward. So thank you. I look forward to answering the questions that I can. If not, we'll go back to Raleigh, get those answers, and bring them back to you. Thanks so much.
Just before I bring Brandon up, I think it's worth stating, repeating basically what Zack said. Zack, we had a long conversation in one of the local restaurants after his town hall about all his philosophies on education. That man is committed to educating our youth. He understands and is committed to our future, and its future's in our youth. And also for, I called him Professor Woodard, but Professor Hawkins, but really that's rightfully belongs to Mr. Woodard, who is a member of the Duke faculty. So we've got 2 educators. They're both on the transportation committees, and we should be delighted to have them representing us. With that, Doug, ready? Come on up.
Herman, thanks for the introduction. My name is Brandon Jones. I work with NCDOT, and I'm the division engineer for Division 5. And we'll kind of cover that area in just a few minutes. But with me, I want to introduce some other NCDOT folks I have with us. Tracy Parrott is our deputy division engineer. John Sandor is our district engineer, which covers Durham County, Granville County, and Person County. And David Kilson's our Division 5 planning engineer. Thanks for having us out. We'll share with you a little bit of information about the North Carolina Department of Transportation. A lot of folks don't really understand how we're set up, how we're organized, and then really what it takes to do a large transportation project in this state. All right, next. So looking at our publicly maintained road miles across the state of North Carolina, NCDOT is responsible for over 80,000 maintained road miles. That's over 15,000 of primary routes, which include interstates, US and NC routes, and then we have a very large secondary system, 65,000 miles of the secondary system. So, go ahead, next. North Carolina does not have a county-maintained network of roads. Okay, the counties do not maintain roadways. It falls on the state and the municipalities. So it's a little bit different than a lot of states. Some other states are set up similarly, but North Carolina is set up like that. So North Carolina is the 9th most populous state, but has the 2nd largest state-maintained network in the country. Anybody want to guess who's number 1? Texas, yeah. Next. Okay. So NCDOT across the state, we're broken into 14 different transportation divisions. Next. So There we go. All right, a little bit about Division 5. It covers 7 counties: Wake County, Durham, Person, Granville, Vance, Warren, and Franklin counties. A little bit happening in those counties from a growth standpoint, a little bit happening in those counties from a transportation standpoint as well. Over 14,500 lane miles in Division 5 alone. We have the passenger rail stations in Durham, Cary, and Raleigh. RDU Airport, we got a couple members from RDU's board here tonight with us, and as well as regional airports across the area. And the Turnpike Authority, this is the first area that the Turnpike Authority operated a toll facility in the state of North Carolina. Next. All right, so a couple of fun facts. We talked about our road system in Division 5. So those are the states, I'm not going to read through all of those, that have less road mileage than we have in the 7 counties here to maintain. And then you look at Wake County, which is by far the largest road system in the state, at over 2,400 miles. Hawaii, Rhode Island, and New Jersey have a smaller state-maintained network than what we have just in Wake County. Next. So I want to spend some time kind of how a road gets built. It's not a simple process, it's a very complicated process and can be a very long and drawn out process, but it's a very important process. It starts with the long-range planning as we move from left to right on the screen. Long-range planning, and we're going to talk about it a little bit more about the long-range plans in this area, but it determines the needs. Those needs are based on existing land use policies, how fast an area is growing. Then you get into, in North Carolina, we have a prioritization system. So when you submit projects for funding, they go through a prioritization system, scoring process. And then if they score well enough, they can be funded through our 10-year transportation improvement program. And then you get into the actual planning of a project where you're going through an environmental document, you're really focusing on the true purpose and need of the project, and you're looking at environmental impacts and human environment impacts as well, natural environment, human environment impacts. And you're trying to minimize the impacts. So a lot of times you'll have different alternates that you have to go through when you're planning a project, and you choose the one that meets the purpose and need, and also that's the least minimally impactful. Then you get into a full-blown design. A design leads to acquiring right-of-way. Then you actually build the facility under construction, and then we maintain and operate the facility after construction. So project planning, typically that's a 1 to 4 year process alone. Then you get into design. That could be a 2 to 4 year process just to design a roadway. Construction, well, first I'll start with right-of-way and utilities. We've got some projects that purchasing the right-of-way and having to relocate the utilities to get out of the way of construction, that can take anywhere from 1 year on smaller projects to 4 to 5 years on larger projects. So you're already adding these timelines up. These are not typically done concurrently. It's one after another. And then you get into the actual construction of the facility, and that can take anywhere typically from 2.5 to 5 years. Then we maintain it. We take care of it after that. So it kind of gives you an idea that from a long-term plan to put a project into moving, where it's actually gaining ground, where it's being funded and planned and designed and then constructed, you're looking at the better part of a decade. Next. Well, go back one, please. So in North Carolina, and then across the country as well, you have metropolitan planning organizations and rural planning organizations. And then we have in DOT our transportation planning department planning groups. Next. Oh, other way. There you go. All right. So these are the MPOs and RPOs in this area. DCHC, which Doug's the executive director of, is the MPO that covers Durham, Chapel Hill, and Carborough areas. And then Wake County, you have the Capital Area Metropolitan Planning Organization. These are the organizations, their boards are made up of elected officials, and then they have a technical staff, which is typically made up of the partners that serve that region, their technical staff, their engineers or planners, and then their recommendations feed that executive board for ultimate approval of different things that come before them. But the key is to determine the long-term transportation needs, and then to work with NCDOT. We partner together to work to get projects funded. And it does take a partnership to make that happen. Next. So NCDOT had already begun that prioritization process, the process for submitting projects and scoring projects. And then in 2013, we passed a Strategic Transportation Investments Law. That shows us how we take that prioritization process and actually fund projects. Next. So how it's supposed to work, across the top, you'll see the STIP, the State Transportation Improvement Program. Then you have 10 years. It's a 10-year program. So how it's supposed to work is you have a statewide mobility, that's 40% of the overall funding. You have a regional mobility, regional impact area, that's 30%, and then the division needs. Now each one of those, a statewide, regional, and division needs, different projects can be funded at each one of those, and it's a kind of a hierarchy of projects. Next. So I'm not going to read through all the criteria that feed into the different statewide mobility, regional, and division needs. But at the statewide level, think about your interstates, think about your US 70s, okay? At the regional level, you could have other US routes and NC routes, and then the division needs level is your secondary road system, okay? That's your Leesville Road, okay? Then you have other modes of transportation, aviation, bike ped, public transportation, ferry, and rail that we fund out of the STIP. Okay, but the STIP, by law, it's 90% at least goes to highways. Next. So the scoring process. Projects get submitted by the planning organizations, both the Metropolitan and the rural planning organizations, and by the divisions, by myself, okay? But a lot of work goes into coordination before you actually submit projects. We want to make sure that we're submitting projects that are going to be supported and also submitting projects that have a chance to be funded. That's the goal, is to get the project funded, scoring well, and then moving forward in the further design and then construction. So what you see here, going back to the statewide mobility, that takes 40% of the overall funding. If a project is capable of being scored there, but it doesn't make the cut, okay, it can cascade down. So that's what you see, that waterfall effect. It can cascade down and compete at the regional level and then at the division level. But we have to make decisions on whether or not we want a certain project funded at the regional level or the division level based on other needs and for projects that fit those criteria. So for instance, US 70 is a statewide project, but if for some reason it didn't make the statewide cut, it could cascade down to the regional level. Next. Back up one if you don't mind, Herman. Something else I forgot here. So the statewide projects, when you submit those projects, they're 100% data driven. It's all quantitative score. It's looking at travel time savings. It's heavily weighed based on congestion in the area. And then at the regional level, you have a 70% of the quantitative score, and then you have what we start calling the local input scores, and that's 30% at the regional levels. Now the local input points are 15% at the regional levels by the MPO and 15% by the division engineer. So at the regional level and the division level, you have the ability for local input points to further enhance the project scoring. Next. Talk to you a little bit about our 10-year transportation improvement program. Technically, we are still in our 2020 to 2029 transportation improvement program. We typically update these every 2 years. And I'm going to talk a little bit about why we didn't update one in 2022, and we're fixing to approve one for 2024 to 2033. Next. So in the current STIP, here's a list of area projects, and I've kind of zoomed into the southeast Durham area. The one you see in red is the East End connector that we actually opened up last June 30th. That was a long time coming. But I tell you what, it's been absolute big impact to the region for sure. I-885 is the widening and pavement rehab from 40 to the East End connector. Currently, Okay, these are the important words. I'm going to say current, then I'm going to say in a few minutes what's fixing to be approved in June by our Board of Transportation. So currently, I-885 widening would take place in 2028. US 70 conversion to a freeway, which we'll talk about in more detail in a minute, was originally a committed project, which means it had funding in the first 5 years of the STIP. It was originally a committed project with construction in 2027. As we've gone through the last 4 years, and we'll show you cost increases that we've seen in this industry, we have had to continue to balance this program. The STIP is a financially constrained program. You have to balance each year, you have to balance each funding category. So that actually slid from a 2027 construction to what we call post-year construction, which means after the STIP dates. NC 98 from Junction Road to Lynn Road currently is post-year construction. Next. So what have we seen over just the last few years? Everybody knows the inflation that we're in right now. We've seen rising cost. Dr. Mike Walden, economics professor at NC State, spoke to our Board of Transportation about a month ago, and he had a chart, and it said, a lot of the consumer price index costs have gone up about 16%, but in the highway industry, that's gone up 41%. So this is an example of what we've faced. And you think about everything that goes into building a major transportation facility, supply chain issues, workforce issues, supply and demand from a workforce standpoint. But also, you don't do much without having to purchase real estate. And we know what has happened to real estate cost in this time period as well. All those things together have provided this sharp increase in our construction cost. Next. So what have we done? Like I said, we're in the 2020 to 2029 STIP. We were working toward producing a 2022 to 2031 STIP. However, costs continued to rise, not only of projects that we were planning and updating cost estimates, but projects that were going to construction and being awarded to contractors. Those costs were going up, and actually active construction projects. A lot of times you have change orders and things like that on active construction projects, and we saw cost all across the board rise. So we had to push the pause button on that 2022 document in approving that. What we see here was, I mentioned the committed projects, which is if you had funding in the first 5 years, and this is from January of 2022. It did take into account some federal funding that had come through IIJA, and we were still over-programmed across the state, across each region. And I should add, at the regional level, each division is paired with another division for competition. So you'll see Region C is Division 5, which includes Durham, is paired with Division 6, which includes the Fayetteville area, Harnett County, Fayetteville area. So we compete with each other at that funding category. Then when you get down to the division level, it's just projects in Division 5 competing against each other. Next. So let's move to U5720. That's the US 70 freeway conversion project. So as currently defined in the current STIP, which is the 2020 to 2029 STIP, and as we were developing the project, it was a full freeway conversion of US 70. It will tie in with what's happening in Wake County with U5518, which is full freeway conversion of US 70 from 540 basically to the county line. And then the Durham section would extend that freeway all the way to the new I-885 interchange. So the Wake County section is planned to proceed with a design build contract around 2026. Next. All right, there you go.
You can tell this is not a career building.
All right, so U5720 started in the 2020 STIP with funding for right-of-way and utilities in 2024, construction in 2027, and that committed status. And as our costs have increased and we've had to balance the program, It will end the current STIP with right-of-way and utilities funded in 2027 and construction post years in an uncommitted status, which means, committed means it doesn't have to go back through prioritization. It's kind of a big deal. Uncommitted means it goes and competes again with other projects. Next. So this is a timeline. Like I said, our 2024 to 2033 STIP will be approved by the Board of Transportation in June of 2023. We've been working hard over the last year and a half to get this 10-year program balanced. We started with a draft that was released in April of 2022, and then we took into account the federal IIJA funds, and also our friends in the legislature passed very important piece of legislation last year with transportation-related goods sales tax coming to NCDOT. And what that entailed was a 2% in this fiscal year, 4% next fiscal year, and 6% from there forward. And each percentage point represents about $100 million. So we saw $200 million coming in, then $400 million, then $600 million. Now those funds are divided between what we call the highway fund side and the trust fund side. Highway fund is what you would think of as our maintenance operations, resurfacing, bridge preservation and things like that. And then the trust fund side is typically what you would refer to as the capital side that builds large projects. Next. So we're about to approve the 2024 to 2033 STIP, and we're already starting to work on the 2026 to 2035 STIP. It's about a year and a half process to go through the prioritization, scoring process to finalize the document. So we're already starting on the next one that should be approved basically 2 years from now. If we can wait until the end with questions, thanks. Now let's get into the local planning process. All right. So every metropolitan planning organization puts out what's called a Metropolitan Transportation Plan. That plan, like I mentioned earlier, is based on the future needs of an area. Okay, and it's a long outlook plan, but it is a fiscally constrained plan. That's an important thing to remember. It's not a pie in the sky what our needs might be. It's taken into account projected revenues over the next typically 25 to 30 years, and then producing what you think would be delivered based on the needs during that period of time. So it's not just saying this is what our needs are. It's saying this is what our needs are, but fiscally constrained. Okay. So 2045, DCHC Metropolitan Transportation Plan had US 70 as that freeway section, like I talked to, that we were developing as an organization, going from 4 lanes divided to 6 lane divided. Next. Then earlier last year, the MPO adopted the 2050 Metropolitan Transportation Plan. Next. Okay. Oh, one back. That's fine. Go ahead and one forward. I'm sorry. No wonder the clicker wouldn't work, the button on them. All right, so zooming into this area, and we take a look at the 2050 Metropolitan Transportation Planning projects. Once again, you see the I-85 modernization from I-40 to I-885. These are done in horizon years, so by decades, and that's got a 2040 horizon year. NC98 from Miami Boulevard to Nichols Farm Drive was a 2050 horizon year. Northern Durham Parkway, 2050 horizon year. Leesville Road Extension, 2050. Andrew Avenue Extension, 2050. But like I said, these not only are looking at needs, but it's fiscally constrained. Okay, so that's a very important thing to remember. Lynn Road Extension, 2050. Then the Lynn Road, Pleasant Road connector that is constructed. Okay. Next. So I shared with you in the 2045 MTP, US 70 was shown as a freeway going from 4 lane divided to 6 lanes. In the 2050 MTP, the planning organization changed that. They now have US 70 in Durham County from, basically the Wake County line to 885. That's staying as a 4-lane roadway and just a modernization project, which means it wouldn't be converted to a full freeway. So what NCDOT was planning with the freeway project. We had been developing this project over the previous years as a 6-lane, full controlled access facility freeway. That means you're only serving that facility by interchanges, with an interchange at Miami Boulevard. Then we had grade separation or overpasses at Pleasant Drive and Page Road Extension. There were 2 different alignments that we had created to look at the impacts that each alignment would have. A north alignment, a south alignment. The goal was to have a preferred alternative, to choose one of those alignments last year. However, when the MPO adopted the new MTP, which potentially changed what US 70 would look like, we pushed the pause button. They started a new US 70 corridor study, which is ongoing, and Doug will share details of that in just a minute. Next. So U5720, US 70 is actually broken into 2 different projects, an A and a B. As it's going to be shown and approved in June in our new transportation improvement program, the right-of-way, utilities, and construction will all be what we called funded for preliminary engineering only, which means we can continue with the engineering on the project. We can continue with the environment, getting to an environmental document, a preferred alignment. We can continue getting with design, which is going to take, for a project like US 70, it takes several years to get through. But it does mean that US 70 will compete for funding in the next step, which is the 2026 to 2035 step. The outcome of the US 70 corridor study could lead to modifications to the project and impact how the project is actually scored in the next prioritization cycle. Still on the US 70 project, when it was released in August, we had a draft STIP released in April, then last August, and then another one just released this past May. But in August, we saw the B section of U5720 have funding in the first 5 year, which would commit that project, okay? Which might sound like that's a good thing. Typically, it would be if you knew exactly what the project was going to be and everybody was in agreement with what's moving forward. However, with that being kind of up in the air as the US 70 corridor study is moving forward, we made a recommendation to what we call a swap out, to swap out that project from committed status and swap in another project. So the MPO was, in my opinion, very gracious to allow us to swap in a rail grade separation project at Trinity Road and a section of NC 54 near I-40. And it kept A and B together, so there was no reason to fund and commit one U5720 project without the other, because we're not going to build them separately. Next. Go back one, I'm sorry, Herman. I was still one slide behind you. Other notable projects that will be included in the 2024 to 2033 STIP, U5934, which is I-885, that section between I-40 and the East End Connector, adding lanes and rehabilitating the pavement structure will be shown as right-of-way in fiscal year 2028, construction in fiscal year 2029. However, the current scope showing adding lanes is in conflict with the 2050 MTP, which specifies modernization and no additional lanes. Stay right there. Go back. Stay right there. Go back. Yes, sir. And then U6120 will be shown as a committed project, which is a big deal. And the MPO worked to actually swap that one in and improve the status of that project. But NC 98 Holloway Street from Junction Road to Lynn Road, that project will construct safety improvements, widen to add a median, bicycle lane, sidewalks, transit stop improvements, and traffic signals with right-of-way in 2028 and construction in 2030. Yes. Also in the area is a pretty major railroad project to grade separate Ellis Road, Glover Road, and then actually closes the Wren Road railroad crossing and ties Wren back into the local streets. That one would be shown in fiscal year 2028 for construction. Next. So that was the big picture, large transportation projects that are going to be shown in the new STIP. There are other ways to fund smaller transportation projects, which we coordinate with the MPO, we coordinate with the city and county frequently to try to get done. All those type of projects are competitive. There's not much we have from a funding bucket that's not competitive, and it needs to be competitive, okay? That's very important. For one thing is our Highway Safety Improvement Program. We funded a project in coordination with the city of Durham. They actually have some dollars in this, so we worked together to get this project funded to do turn lanes on NC98 at Lynn Road. That should go to construction in March of 2025. So even a small project like that, it takes a while to get it put on the ground. It's not something that you can go out there and do in just a few months. Other notable small projects, we have spot mobility funds, which means we can improve spot areas, typically intersections, to improve the operational capacity of the intersection. The previous project at 98 and Lynn was really driven by crash data and safety improvement needs. NC98 at Mineral Springs will be building right turn lanes on Mineral Springs Road. That should go about a year from now in April of 2024. So what you don't see on there, right? You don't see a Leesville Road project as far as being funded through us. You don't see a lot of other things that are being funded through us. It really shows you the challenge that we have, right, in an area that's growing as fast as this area, as fast as the Wake County area, and this region is growing, to try to keep up with the demands. And I've been with NCDOT for over 27 years. I was born and raised in southern Wake County. I've seen this area undergo so many changes. We haven't been able to keep up. You don't. Nobody in the country can really keep up with the way this area has grown. But it's still a pretty daggone fascinating area to live in and work in and be able to be a part of the transportation improvements. So how else do we do roadway improvements? I mentioned John Sandor earlier. He's our district engineer. Our district engineers review developments from the NCDOT side. We work with the city and county planning departments to make sure developers are being held responsible for putting improvements on the ground. They do what's called a traffic impact analysis, which shows how their development is going to impact local area. Okay, you can't take it several miles outside. Typically, these improvements aren't improving the overall network. They're more like the smaller projects I told you. A turn lane here, improving an intersection, is what you're looking for. Typically, the system-wide network improvements are left up to us. But improvements may include off-site intersection operational additions, construction of thoroughfares within the development, road widenings as well. Examples of this: additional left turn lane on eastbound US 70 onto Leesville Road, a developer improvement. What you see with Northern Durham Parkway through Brightleaf, developer improvement, right? So that's how a lot of things get put on the ground. So we have close coordination, close partnership with the city and county to see what we can do to make sure that developers are doing their part. They're not going to solve what our needs are in this area by any means. They just can't. There's too many background needs, too many needs that came before them. And you can see what our transportation improvement program over the next 10 years is going to be focused on in this area. And it's not touching everything.
I'm sorry to come out of order. I missed the one thing I wanted to hear in your talk. You sort of went by it.
Dale, can I ask
What
you
is
to
the
wait
start
until,
date for the
he's
fire
going to be on the dais.
518?
Dale, if I may, he's going to be on a panel.
No, he said it, but I didn't hear it.
Yeah.
He said something about the start date for the 55, the fire police.
Fiscal year 2026, but we are evaluating some pretty major utility needs along that corridor. So that's subject to change.
The website still said fall 24. You were saying that's been moved back?
That will be with the new STIP. So our website, and we have to keep these things based on current STIPs, and it changes with the new STIP. So we're going to be in the current STIP for the next few weeks, and then we move to a new STIP. The new STIP shows a different schedule. That's why it's like that. Yeah, it's a little bit confusing.
Because I thought you said a later date. That's what had me confused.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it. And now from our local MPO, Doug. Oh,
All right, how's everybody doing so far? That was a lot of really great information to digest. It's pretty intense, right? When I was when I took 9th grade civics at Southern Durham High School over on Ellis Road, they didn't tell us what an MPO was. They didn't tell you that there was a council of elected officials from all of our local communities and counties that got together and made big decisions about transportation projects. But that's what happens. And it is a lot to take in, and it's unfamiliar, and it's our job, and we're trying to do a much better job than we have historically to engage our stakeholders, our residents, our constituents, our businesses, our elected officials, and give them great information. So following up on Brandon's presentation, a couple things I want to point out. That projects and programming in this area are subject to change. And one of the biggest drivers, as Brandon mentioned, was the very intense inflation we've experienced over the past few years. So when we're escalating inflation, just like a carton of eggs went up from 99 cents to $12, highway projects are escalating very quickly too. It's always our role to operate within our standards to be good fiscal stewards of public money and deliver projects that solve problems the most cost-effective way possible, right? We're not here to build things that are Cadillacs when we need Pontiacs. So I'm going to touch a little bit on the US 70 corridor study and what we're working on. Thank you, Herman. And by the way, thank you, Herman, for setting all this up and your group. We really are glad the Leesville Road Coalition and Carolina Arbors had us out. So to give you a little bit of background, I've been at the MPO since last July. Before last July, the MPO, which is representative of communities in Durham, Orange, and Chatham counties, including the city of Durham, the town of Carrboro, the town of Hillsborough, and the town of Chapel Hill, and your regional transportation, public transportation provider, Go Triangle, and the State Board of Transportation. The board decided to make a change to our Metropolitan Transportation Plan, and as a result of those changes, to try to be effective stewards that solve problems in ways that not only improved or reduced traffic congestion, but promoted non-motorized travel and inequity and inequitable access to our roadway network. We commissioned a consultant team to review the 4-mile stretch between the Wake County border, where the Northern Durham Parkway comes in, and the new I-885 Easton Connector. As I said, we want to solve a problem, right? There's traffic there. We drive it. I experienced it on my way out here. My mom still lives over in East Durham. Every time I go to see her, I experience it too. There's lots of ways to solve those problems. We want to make sure we do it effectively, and we want to provide long-standing opportunities for other modes of transportation. Not that any of us, I think, anticipates bicyclists riding in 55-mile-an-hour plus traffic, but definitely we want to make sure that there are safe non-motorized crossings, there are safe intersections, because that's where most of the crashes happen. We want to make sure that there's public transportation opportunities for the future along the corridor. So the MPO and the City of Durham moved forward with a contract to examine that. Next slide, please. So as part of leading the project, we established a core technical team that includes NCDOT Division 5 and Brandon's staff. It includes stakeholders from the North Carolina Intermodal Division, another division of the state DOT. The MPO staff that's functioning as the staff on the project. The county, the city, both their transportation department and other stakeholders at the city, Durham City County Planning, and Go Triangle. Additionally, there is a Durham-based consulting firm that's leading our public input effort. I'll get into a little bit more on the next steps with that. Next slide, please, Herman. So most recently, in April, the core technical committee of those staff level stakeholders got together and had a basically, we call it a charrette. It's a fancy planning term for a workshop. But a workshop internally to go through all the data and alternatives that the consultants provided and looking at the initial round of public input that happened at the end of 2022 and try to come up with some alternatives that could be developed. I'm going to tell you right now, I don't know what those alternatives that they're working on are. I do know that we're going to be presenting them over the next few weeks and asking for more input beginning in June. It's daunting to try to get input over such a large area that carries so much traffic, but we've got some good ideas on how to get information out. I'll make sure that Herman is able to broadcast the links to the projects and upcoming public meetings and any other opportunities to this group and any others for your input. We really value that. We couldn't do our jobs without that public engagement portion. At the end of June, we anticipate presenting a report to what we call a technical committee. It is the staff level committee of all those agencies that belong to the MPO. And then we anticipate that this fall we'll be presenting a final alternative recommendation to the board. I shouldn't call it final. I should say the study preferred alternative. And the MPO technical committee and board will take a look at that and go from there. Next slide, Herman. Almost. There we go. So again, we have a project website. I'm assuming that the group will be able to access this presentation. You can go to that link. And again, I'll get additional information to Herman and the other event organizers to get out to this group. So that's where the study's at. Like I said, we've done a lot of work at looking at traffic congestion, traffic crashes, where there might be opportunities to have safe non-motorized crossings in the area. And our work's really cut out for us because this is a busy road with a lot of stuff going on. So we want to make sure it's safe and accessible to all the people that use it. Thank you.
Doug, Brandon, Zack, and Mike? Boom, that was a little tall. I just want to add, while they're assembling up here, as you may realize, my hair is a little bit long, a little more unkempt than it's supposed to be. But back in the 70s in Boston, it was down to here. And I'm not used to just presenting ideas or opportunities. I do stuff, okay? And so when we, actually Leslie and I started the programming for Politics and Culture, it was down to 8 members, and that shot up to over 200. And it was nice to be able to educate and entertain. As you can tell, I like doing that. But I also wanted to act. So I asked the leadership of Politics and Culture if we could form some sort of a subcommittee that would actually be able to do stuff. And 2 of the projects that they assigned us with was, one, to create a coalition of neighboring communities so politicians would be more likely to hear our voices. And we did that. That's the Leesville Road Coalition with an addressable audience of about 4,000 that has about 900 active members and growing, and we'll have more announcements in the next couple of months. The other thing they wanted was to fix the intersection at Leesville and Highway 70. And oh, poor Steve Schull heard a lot from me, as I'm sure Mark Anthony can attest. And they were good. They got money from a developer, and that's presumably why we have that improved intersection. What's my point? We the people. We can sit back and saying, well, it can't happen. Oh, how can we wait till 2045 and all that other kind of stuff. But the people that have the purse strings, the people that make the decisions are in this room right now. They came to hear each and every one of you. And if you don't speak up, we get what we paid for. Okay? So please, this is not the end. It is not a presentation. The whole purpose of this meeting is to encourage you to get involved, speak up for what you need, and let our elected officials know that they're supposed to serve us. It doesn't mean disrespectfully, okay? And we're making, Stephen and I are making big efforts to be able to reach out to other areas, like with the Inter-Neighborhood Council, so that our asks, our desires, our push are informed by a broader view of what Durham is needing, and therefore we should be more realistic to our elected officials. So, that's it for my commercial message. Now it's going to turn to you. Kim, you want to take a microphone? Here you are, sir. Those of you who don't know, here's our HOA president, Kim Crossman. Thank you, Kim. You guys don't have, we got a microphone. What happened to stand? Well, here. Wait a minute. You guys can share. We only have provisions for 3 microphones in here, so we have to be judicious. There you go. If you can just share that as we come along. Okay, so we're just going to ask for questions. I think, Stephen Nill, you had one to get us going? Stephen? Oh, you stepped out. Well, I can count on Dale. Dale, do you want to start off? Here, wait. Excuse me.
Just quick, I want to apologize. Really, the only question I wanted to know was the status of 5518, so when I didn't get it, I'm sorry I jumped in. Just a general thing on the Caballero whatever, okay? Just a comment. There are enough of us here who have trouble balancing on a stationary bike. We don't care about bicycles and stuff. You know, we really don't. You know, nobody, you know, and that stretch of road, the main thing is that Miami Boulevard or Miami whatever interchange to get fixed. You know, and we're really disappointed about I'm disappointed about the 5518 delay. You know, I understand the finances, but that's the biggest delay problem that I have. Yeah, well, no, more a comment. No, seriously, the planning business, trying to plan, I worked in Washington for years and took the subway. Washington supports that kind of mass transit because everybody wants to be downtown. You got 27 sub-downtowns in this area. That kind of mass transit ain't gonna work.
Kim, you want to grab the next one, or do you want to ask a question?
I understand that a lot of the development along US 70 required the developers to have easements for potential future expansion. If the road is not widened, what happens to those easements?
Anyone can take that.
Okay, it is. I can't speak specifically, but typically if the development does take place, then when they re-record their development plat, that easement's a part, the new easement's a part of that plat. It stays in place. That new easement's typically set based on a thoroughfare standard for the corridor itself. It really can't take into account a decision that hasn't been made on the US 70 corridor yet. So that's what we were trying to get to in 2022, is to establish a preferred alternative, or either north or south alignment based on the freeway, at the time, freeway design, right, of a 6-lane divided facility. If we'd established that, then local planning could take that into account as they see redevelopment happen in the area.
My question is, why is the highway department not coordinating more public transportation, safe, reliable public transportation? In this section of Southeast Durham, there's almost none. And I also wonder if our city council and county commissioners keep approving new development one after the other. Do they even talk to you about how many new single-family homes are coming? And do you have any control over saying wait a minute, we'll never be able to handle that.
That's a very good question. So let me start out with the public transportation, and we do coordinate. The locals are the ones that typically operate the local public transportation. We also have Go Triangle that operates public transportation in the area. And all those are, we're not in a vacuum when it comes to planning transportation projects and delivering those. The local public transportation plans do come into account as far as do we need to look at things like bike lanes? And we even do that on resurfacing projects. A good example, recently we resurfaced Irwin Road, coordinated heavily with the city of Durham to include bike lanes on Irwin Road near the Duke Medical Facilities. So that's one way we coordinate, but public transportation as well, we coordinate pretty heavily on that as well. And there is some funding that comes through our STIP from a public transportation standpoint. So the next question, to make sure I remember this correctly, is, yeah, we do talk, like I said earlier, our district engineer, John Sandors, our lead engineer that coordinates with the city and county planning department as far as looking at new developments, looking at the impacts of new developments, and doing what they can to mitigate those impacts. Now, what you see with a developer mitigating impacts is different than the overall region growing, adding to what's already a pretty congested area. They can't fix that. The developer's not going to spend $100 million to try to fix a project that existed before they came on. They're there to look at, okay, my development's impacting a certain intersection. If I add a right turn lane or a left turn lane at that intersection, that's helping traffic operations.
I had a question for NCDOT. When you put together a STIP, with all the different projects that you have, I know what we had was a STIP for US 70 on the Durham side, another STIP for on the Wake side. I know there's an extension of Aviation Parkway. Is there any process involved where some of these projects are related together and they should be prioritized as a group versus individual segments?
Yeah, that's a really good question as well. And it comes down to how a project's going to score. And a lot has to do with the overall cost. And I'll give you an example. If we were to have programmed U5518, which is the Wake County US 70 section, and U5720 all together, it would probably have exceeded as one single project, had a tough time competing and scoring because of the overall cost, even though it's pretty simple to see the benefit that project would have, right? So we break projects down. U5518 is one single project. U5720 is two different projects, and hopes to compete on scoring. Now, remember, that level of project is competing against other projects in the state. We don't necessarily know what other projects in the state are going to be because we get to submit new projects every STIP cycle. So what was fixing to happen later this year is new projects being submitted to compete for that 2026 to 2035 STIP funding. It's a science to it, and we coordinate closely with the MPOs to try to make sure that a project that's being submitted has a chance to actually be funded.
Thank you. So if we were to enact this plan to make this section of US 70 a boulevard and add sidewalks and bicycle lanes to Highway 70 instead of it becoming a limited access highway, will the state pay for that? And if not, who will? Who will pay for the bike lanes and the sidewalks and everything else that's peripheral to the road?
So if the result of the US 70 corridor study provides us an alternative corridor that NCDOT feels works, and it's proven, it's not just feels, it's a data-driven process, right? It's when you analyze traffic into the future, it's a data-driven process. So David Kilson's staring at me because I used the word feel in that, but that's not correct. It's very technical. But if the result of the US 70 corridor study provides us something that works operationally, okay, and also has those additional benefits to connectivity to the areas, both on each side of US 70, which is very important, provides ability to have future transportation, public transportation connections, which is very important to that corridor. And then also, if it can stay a boulevard section, we won't object to it, right? But it has to prove to us, data-driven, that it's going to work. US 70 is a regionally important corridor, not just a locally important corridor. What happens on US 70 in this area impacts how I-40 functions, okay? It impacts how the region, transportation around the region functions. So it's important for us to get this right, it really is.
Thank you for your time and detailed explanation. The city approved a significant increase in planning projects, not only off of 70, but off of Carpenter Road, Doc Nichols Road, et cetera. We're talking thousands of new homes and townhomes. Where can we, the taxpayers, see the fees that each developer paid and the responsibility that each builder has to improve the infrastructure on those roads? And lastly, can our elected officials give us the assurance that those developer fees and the significant increase in property taxes are being spent in our area? And I greatly appreciate your responses being as specific as possible.
Come on, guys, well, somebody can answer that, right?
Well, the answer is those arrangements are typically conducted through Durham City County Planning. We can pass that question along to them and have them reach back out to the group on how to address the specificity of the question.
I will add to that, I can't speak on the developer fees. I don't know how that really works with the city county planning. But the coordination that the city county planning does with our district engineer's office that leads to improvements being required of the developer that gets put into their plan approvals, okay, that a lot of times you might see it as based on a certain number of certificates of occupancy. Let's say it's a 1,000-home neighborhood. Well, at the time they have 300 homes built before they get 301, certain improvements may need to be put on the ground. Now, what's complicated about developer improvements and so many happening in one area like it's happening around here is you have overlap of responsibilities. So you may see one intersection that shows turn lanes and things like that being done, and you may see 3 or 4 different developers that have the same responsibility to improve that intersection. So coordinating that is very complicated. It's a lot to do with timing of that development. Developers understand that, right? They know that timing can be everything as well. So it's not an easy process to work through as far as who's going to actually do the work, even though you're putting the responsibility on a specific developer. What you want to have happen is that improvement get put on the ground at the end of the day.
Good afternoon. I have a question. The MPO is proposing to give the public some alternatives for what the MPO STV is coming up with alternatives for the boulevard. Will the alternatives that NCDOT propose be presented at the same time along with the traffic analysis so the public can see what the boulevard versus the freeway as a comparison? Or will it be just the boulevard alternatives?
I'm not aware that we will focus on the previous traffic forecasts with the freeway as part of our presentation for public information. What I can suggest is that we will definitely be presenting any traffic forecasts that are done for the proposed configuration that will move forward for additional public input to make sure that it is an improvement over the congested situation that we have on US 70 today.
I'd like to do an add-on to that, if I may. We were interviewed earlier by...
Oh, wow.
Lisa, right to say. I think her question might have been a little bit different, and I'd like to try and make sure we're getting the question answered. Let me explain to you what we mean. Today, Steve and I were interviewed by CBS, and we gave them all the results of the surveys that were run by the MPO. In none of those was there an option for NCDOT's plan. And so I think maybe she was asking, in the next studies, are you going to contrast a boulevard with a freeway approach so that the feedback that you get is informed by both sides, both options?
As I mentioned, we are moving forward with presenting some alternatives that the technical team, including the consulting engineers, have come up with. The technical alternatives are meant to solve problems beyond only traffic congestion and meant to address other issues and concerns that were adopted as regional principles for our transportation plan that we feel a limited access freeway would not accomplish. So to that end, I do not believe that we will be specifically presenting the prior express design, right? The traffic forecasting and...
Traffic forecasting, I don't think so. I think it's part of the regular full-blown project development.
So the previous project development process. That said, again, NCDOT Division 5 and the Intermodal Division are on our project team and are there to influence and discuss concerns with traffic flow on the corridor. So to answer your question, no, I don't believe we're going to present. We had a previous study that had traffic forecasting at the initiation of a design process versus potential traffic forecasting that we have with an alternative configuration. Okay?
Hi, the score is 0-0, by the way. That's most important. So I want to go back to, I'm looking at this studies. You've got an online survey, and a couple things, it's going to sound like a variation on the same theme, is the online survey, it seems the results were discounted because the sample set was affluent, educated, non-minority, and auto-centric. And then there were 2 follow-up surveys, and again, it was similar. I don't know the sample size. I don't know how many people, if it's statistically projectable or any of those things back in my college days. But it's very separated between those in the considered set for multimodal and those in the car-centric considered set. And I'm wondering if there would be a question or a way to assess for those 2, a preference one versus the other in terms of sample size and numbers. I think you know what these pretty pie charts show. Does that make sense?
I think it does. I think you're basically inquiring as to how we plan on using that breakdown of information from the initial round of public involvement. So from my impression, regardless of the outcome of the survey, the demographic cohorts of the survey respondents show that we may have missed the mark on making sure we provided effective public outreach access to the questions we're asking. We also realized that survey was conducted between the holidays of Thanksgiving and Christmas this past year. And again, I don't know the specifics of why that time frame was chosen, but we believe that through some different outreach efforts, we can enhance access across all potential demographic respondent cohorts and get a more meaningful cross-section of the community. across the entire area. Another thing that was captured that didn't come across necessarily in the survey results that we posted online was that we're not sure that we're capturing a good respondent pool on the surveys of people that are traveling the corridor but may not necessarily live adjacent to it. There's a lot of traffic that gets processed through the US 70, those 4 miles, and we need to come up with a way to not just engage the folks that are most directly impacted, although don't get me wrong, that's extremely important, but also users of the highway and their perceptions and thoughts about the conditions that are out there today. You're welcome.
Good. Thank you, gentlemen, for being here. My question I think, is directed towards Mr. Woodard. And at the state level, it's very clear that there just isn't enough money to go around. And there probably will always be that way. But the challenge I see and I've heard about was, I believe it was last year, at the end of 2022, there was a budget surplus in the state. And wanted to basically, there was a big question about how we're going to use those funds. And if we've got money left over and you've got a clear demand in the area that's an economic engine for the Raleigh-Durham area and for the state, why are we not allocating more of those funds into the transportation needs and to some degree in the education needs that are clearly present in this area?
Well, that is the $8 billion question, because that's about what our surpluses are running right now. And I would add healthcare is another area that we have underspent in, particularly mental health. And I could go on and on with the list. I'm one vote of 170 in Raleigh. I would suspect my colleague to the left here is similar in thinking where we should probably spend a lot of the surplus. The majority of our colleagues in the General Assembly right now want to save and keep those surpluses at very healthy balances and not spend in those areas. So until we're willing to change the majority there and put folks like me and Representative Hawkins writing the budgets, that's what you're going to continue to see. It's a straight up political decision about how to spend that surplus. I think we underfund education considerably. We're under a court order to do that. It's in our state constitution. But you may have seen tonight on the 6 o'clock news, Governor Cooper declared a state of emergency in education right now. So we're not funding there at all. Since one of the first votes I took when I went to the General Assembly 10 years ago was to not expand Medicaid. So it was a proactive vote to not expand Medicaid. We are not spending. We have over 17,000 people waiting on waivers for mental health services. And we are only taking about 1,000 off of that wait list a year. That's barely keeping up with the demand. So we're not spending there either. I'm glad, I appreciate Brandon mentioning some of the legislation we've passed in the last few years. I have worked on all of those pieces of funding legislation that we've seen over the last 4 or 5 years to move some of our work forward on transportation, and we're not spending there either. But these are straight up political decisions, and until you change the politicians, you won't change the decisions.
And I really appreciate.
Yeah, my questions.
Oh, hold on. No, I really appreciate that question. I wanted to add on, just to give a little more color to Senator Woodard's, to his remarks. I'll be pretty clear. When he said the straight up political decisions, they are decreasing, they're giving tax cuts to the most wealthy, right, in North Carolina, which nothing wrong with being wealthy, but the ability to have additional tax cuts and personal income, and then cutting corporate tax, and they're trying to get it to zero, We're already number one in business in the country, in the state of North Carolina. Companies that move here, the ones that I represent and we all work at in RTP, are not asking for additional tax cuts. When you do those kinds of things, regardless of what your surplus is, you cut all the things that you're talking about. You don't have money for education, you don't have money for roads, you don't have money for mental health. So the surplus is something that they probably are not going to touch, and a lot of that surplus is also getting eaten up by those tax cuts. A couple other things. $500 million was just proposed. It's going to pass the House and Senate to go to opportunity scholarships, which are private vouchers. That comes out of the general fund. So again, start thinking about that $8 billion that he talked about, and now you start deducting personal income tax, corporate income tax, and now $500 million that'll go public money to private schools. And then right now, we have 5,000 teacher vacancies in the state of North Carolina. Think about the $8 billion that I just talked about, and start thinking about where that money could be spent. And they want $2 to $3 billion that sits in what we call our rainy day. And so that's just money just in case a bad thing happens. And then Mike mentioned that we're also trying to do some good things that cost money, specifically around innovation waivers. And not only that, but making sure for those who are taking care of our most vulnerable populations, including those with developmental disabilities, we're trying to increase those amounts to $18. And so I just wanted to add a little more color with the details of what that looks like. And again, $2 to $3 billion of a surplus is just going in the coffers. And then the rest of it is personal income tax being cut, corporate income tax, and then just not having good priorities for the state. So thank you.
Thank you for that comment. I'm married to someone who taught for 37 years, and she is constantly telling me how appalled she is about the state of education. I have 2 grandchildren in this community. I worry about their being able to breathe, but I wanted to talk about some national events or trends that are coming. First of all, the Apple headquarters, which I think is still coming, and our area here is within 30 miles of a commute to that. And I know Apple wanted to put their headquarters somewhere where there was mass transit. So my question on mass transit is, what form of mass transit are you considering, and if any of that will be available to the residents of Carolina Arbors? Second trend is the trend towards electric cars. And so I'm asking you, what are the plans for charging stations and the facilities for electric as part of your transportation plan? The third thing is the Biden administration did an infrastructure bill, and I wonder if any of that money has been allocated to North Carolina's transportation infrastructure, and especially as it relates to the Durham County.
Hot potato.
I think, let's see, the first question was transit. Well, we're looking at a lot of different forms of public transportation. We have intercity passenger rail that we are working with NCDOT to provide meaningful enhancements to between major centers. Probably the most successful of those efforts right now is the S-Line, which is part of a proposed strategic national corridor between DC and Charlotte, or all the way to Atlanta? Well, Charlotte at least. We're looking at enhanced line haul bus services that connect the major centers within the triangle. So places like the airport, large developments, South Point, North Hills, the downtowns, downtown Cary, Mooresville, RTP. We are looking at supplementing our normal bus routes that That funding, a lot of comes through a sales tax you're already paying that's programmed into our local countywide transit plans. We are also looking at enhancing special projects like microtransit connections, improving bus stops, providing guaranteed rides home for people that are transit dependent or transit users. So there's really a wide range of public transportation options. What was the third question? Well, we are going to be exploring a connection along US 70 along this corridor. So depending on how that addresses, and there should be what I would call dial-a-ride service or on-demand transit service available to you through Durham City or County, I believe. It might be Go Durham Access provides that. And I apologize for not knowing that. I can follow back up with more information for you. Electric car charging, there's a lot of resources going into that right now. I believe the state of North Carolina recently adopted a statewide charging infrastructure plan. I know that a lot of new developments are putting in chargers, whether they're required to or not, through local planning processes. I'm not aware of anything specific that we're doing with requiring electric car infrastructure into our kind of high-level transportation planning. Why not? Well, I'm not suggesting it's not a bad idea. I drive an electric car. I think it's the direction it's going. I think that one significant step that the state of North Carolina is taking is that they are examining how to convert from a gasoline-based excise tax to road user fees to make sure that as we convert to an electric fleet, that the cost share is distributed proportionally across both electric vehicle users and conventional combustion engine vehicle users. So.
If I may, sir, we've got a whole bunch of people who want to ask questions. And I want to ask one, if I may, in advance. The plan was to have this meeting go till 8 o'clock and with a stretch to 8:30. I think that's what I all told you. It's now 8:37, and we've all got families. So if people need to leave, I get it. If you'd like to just it's your meeting. So if you think we should call it an end and we could reconvene at another time, let me know. But I just want to be respectful to the human beings that are here that are donating their time and give them an opportunity to get a break. What do you guys think?
I'm happy to stay as long as you all stay. If folks need to leave, then I think they should feel free to leave. But I'm here, so I'll stay.
You guys okay for a little while? All right, I'm going to do a hard stop at 9 because after that it's abusive. Okay, so thank you. Kim?
Yes, thank you, and thank you for your time and staying longer for all of us when of our questions. As a gentleman mentioned a moment ago, there's the bipartisan infrastructure law, and it has 2 new programs in there, the Reconnecting Communities Institute, as well as the Neighborhood Access and Equity Program. When new programs, federal funding grant programs are available, how does the DOT, whether in the MPOs, how do they research those grant programs and find out how we can apply for those grants? They may not apply to the US 70 corridor, but they might apply to other parts of our area. One of those is improving the bike lanes to make sure we have the safe areas potentially. But how do we track the federal funding?
So part of that is knowing what's available, when it becomes available, what you have to do to apply for those grants. NCDOT has been very successful over the past several years at winning grants, not just IIJA grants, but Christie grants. Doug mentioned the S-Line just a second ago, which is we're actually purchasing the CSX rail corridor up through from Raleigh to Richmond, us in Virginia. And then we're going to make improvements to that rail corridor to increase the speeds. We're going to do a lot of grade separations. NCDOT was awarded a $58 million, the largest Christie grant in the country a couple of years ago, to take the engineering on that corridor to 30%. Recently, you've heard about things like the Alligator River Bridge, which is a big bridge on US 64 going toward the Outer Banks. very successful at winning a grant there to move forward the replacement of that bridge, which is a critical piece of infrastructure, not here, but critical piece of infrastructure to the state and in that region. Okay, so we do look for those grants, and then we coordinate with locals if they need, if they're going after a grant and they need letters of support to support their efforts.
Really quickly, I'm Javiera Caballero. I am a Durham City Council member and one of the liaisons to the MPO. I just really wanted to raise up, the City of Durham has done an excellent job under our City Transportation Department with Sean Egan winning some critical awards. We've run some really excellent RAISE grants. One is going to help us redo Durham Station, which is our big bus station downtown. And then the other thing we did was to get a regional, what we're calling Vision Zero plan. We won a lot of money around that, which will help us with multimodal safety. And then in this budget that we will pass at the end of June, the city is putting in a Vision Zero coordinator, which is a person that will help us implement that plan, which is around safety for pedestrians, bicyclists, and motorists. And so that's just some of the work that the city has done. We have gotten very, very good at chasing federal dollars, and we will continue to do so.
Okay. Oh, okay. This is just a quick safety operational question right here. The region or the area that I came from in Wisconsin, all of our intersections had emergency vehicle controlled traffic lights. I have not seen one in this region. And anytime I come up to a busy intersection on Highway 70, there's an emergency vehicle, everybody's going, oh, I have the green light, I'm going to quick get across because I'm not going to make it. Nobody knows where the emergency vehicle is coming, and they don't stop the lights for ways. How come we don't have that here? It just seems to be a very basic safety feature that we should have.
So John's our former, also not only our district engineer, but former division traffic engineer. So I'm going to let him provide a little more insight on this one.
So, good question. Years ago, going way back, they actually did allow that in North Carolina, but it's restricted to only our fire departments. They're the only ones at this time in North Carolina that do have the what we call fire preemption, where they can actually hit a button and it'll then sequence the lights for them to be able to get to their emergency, not only more efficiently but safely. So it does exist, but it's strategically laid out where their fire departments are located. So, yeah, it's. I mean, you'd be looking for a tiny little like. Yeah, it can be well concealed, but they are out there. But they're typically on those high response routes. So maybe by this fire station down the road.
Why would you not consider that anytime you have a big intersection on Fire Creek and 70?
So we would have it at a larger intersection if it's one within a certain proximity to a fire department, one of their stations.
I'm wondering, could you give us a chart, maybe give her a chart and show where there are some?
I mean, even the small little city that I lived in prior to coming here, it was at every major lighted intersection had those lights above it. For any vehicle, it could be an ambulance, fire truck, anything.
So we allow our cities, since they manage their fire departments, to come and approach us. And so I would recommend reaching out to probably Durham Transportation Department, and they would be able to provide you with a map of where those types of technology exist.
That's their approach is.
They work closely with the fire departments where to go.
You talked a lot about the details and the what's and the budgets, and I fail to understand why the MPO contracted another study for that 4-mile section after the state had already come through and made a determination of changing it to a 6-lane limited access highway. That's part one of my question. In that study, when you contracted with to see what your options are, was a question asked and a priority on traffic? What were the priorities that you asked your contractors to look at? Because if the priorities were not traffic and traffic safety, it seems in conflict with the Department of Transportation's goals.
In adopting the Metropolitan Transportation Plan, which set the decision in motion to re-examine plans for the stretch of US 70 and other facilities within the DCHC MPO, our MPO board felt that there were some policy objectives that we wanted to make sure that we carried through our plans and programs. Reducing vehicle miles traveled, reducing, expanding roadways that are very expensive, as we've seen, to rebuild and expand continuously. To improve safety, to improve the environmental effects of our highways and the damage they do to our communities, and to reduce the lack of access. So when the MPO made those decisions, those were the kinds of performance measures we've asked our consultants to look at. I will make sure that when we go out for this next round of public involvement, that the consultants and our team are well aware of making sure that that is explained in the presentation materials and public engagement materials. Okay?
Yes, but what if we disagree with those policy priorities? And that is something that I think this community is seeing getting to do, for example, is very important to get there quickly for people in this community. And if your policy priorities are to encourage bicycles and pedestrian traffic over improving an artery that's critical to state transportation, you know, who sets those priorities, and do we have a voice in that?
Certainly.
Thank you. I just want to give Doug, Doug a break. He is an employee of the MPO. He does not set the policy. Your elected officials do. So the DCHC MPO is not just the city of Durham. It is Durham County. It is Carrboro. It is Chapel Hill. It is Hillsborough. It is Orange County. It's Chatham County. That it was a unanimous vote of a multi-jurisdictional body. And the goal of that MPO was to change how we do traffic in this region for many reasons. The Highway 70 project is one project in a very large area. The idea was to move away for climate change. Many residents had also the opposite idea of what you said. They don't want, we've heard time and time and time again as city officials to move away from fast, large freeway projects. That may be not what you all want in this room, and I completely understand that. But that is not the only view in Durham, and it's not the only view that residents come to us as city councilors. There's just as loud, just as organized voices that are pushing, who are younger, I will say, than this room, and they want multimodal, and they're expecting it, and they're demanding it, and they want a different future for their children and their grandchildren. So I will say that I was part of that vote, and I stand by that vote. Thank you.
Street lights really cause environmental pressure because you're standing at a street light, sitting there, with emissions going, having a smooth stream of traffic, a move towards electric vehicles, a move towards electric buses that can move at high speeds up and down the corridor are other ways to do this without abandoning your goals, but to also have high-speed traffic from here to there.
If I may, it's pretty clear that what we need to do is create an open, ongoing channel to our public officials. So I'm going to make that commitment, and Leslie, if you can get the ITC to work with me on that, we're going to do that. Stephen?
It's interesting, this whole conversation here. It seems a little incongruous to me for the fact that in the past 2 years, we've just approved almost 10,000 new homes out here in developments where people literally, they have to drive to get anywhere. Every one of these developments is set up to be car-centric, the way it's set up in this area, which means you're going to add all of these cars to this area, and you're trying to eliminate traffic. So one of the challenges we have right here, and then Doug, this is kind of for you, is that there is no on-demand bus service out here. There's no bus service at all in this part of Durham. In fact, if you look at Go Durham's map, the map that they use to talk about their plans over the next year. This particular part of Durham is not even physically represented on the map, Go Durham map for buses or anything. So when you're doing one thing, which is approving all of these car-centric developments and then saying we don't want cars, it doesn't really work very well. So we're trying to figure out how do you make the two work together. And so far we haven't heard an answer that really does that.
That's a great point. And I also heard another point brought up earlier. I forgot exactly which one of our audience members brought it up. The way Raleigh-Durham, Chapel Hill developed is not the same as most of the established large cities across the country. We have a different urban form, and it does require new solutions. I-40 wasn't built to connect Raleigh-Durham. It was connect to miss them and go through them. And that's part of its wisdom at the time was don't build a highway where people are, but at the same time, the effects a couple generations later are now that's where everybody wants to be, and there's very intense congestion there. I do apologize for not being an expert, and I'm not saying this in a smart aleck way, but I'm not an expert on the Go Durham system. Typically where there is any public transportation, there is an access program to allow people that are transit dependent to have an ADA or qualified service. Again, I can try to find out information if any of that's available in this area that may not be shown on a route map. So I can try to find out that information and pass it along, and also pass along that there's interest in that. You know, that's part of our public input process. I've been writing a long list of comments down to make sure that we're not just here to answer questions, but we're taking the information back and applying it to the work we're doing.
There's a Go Durham stop at the nearest T Route 2. The only one, but there is miles.
I want to make a comment in addition to what Steve said. Durham City and County are proposing all new subdivisions have low-income housing in them. How are they going to get to work? This is the biggest area growing southeast Durham, and they're not going to have public transportation. And they may not even be able to afford your bicycles. We've got to do something in this area to better serve the public transportation.
Okay, we have anyone else, or I'm going to bring this to a close. If I may, I'm going to make a couple of comments. I've spent enough time on this, it deserves that privilege, right? I want to comment that there are probably 25 people in Carolina Arbors alone that volunteer for SCORE. There are probably 40 people that volunteer to teach in Durham Public Schools. When the pandemic hit, our woodworking shop built 100 desks and bought chairs and donated it to Durham Public Schools. We're not getting a lot back. And what I want to make clear is that we're not looking for gifts out here. We're more than comfortable paying our way. And I would think that the city could post a bond to improve Leesville Road. And I would think the state would accept that to improve. Is that if the city did that? And I can tell you that we met with several development attorneys before we had a town hall, which our mayor was on, our mayor pro tem was on, a bunch of people were on. And we asked these attorneys, could we get the developers in a room and say, what would make Durham better? Could you guys cooperate in a private-public partnership to pony up for some money so that people really like the homes they live in? And oh my God, yes, we'd love to do that. It's never happened. So I want to compel our civic leaders who make these decisions, or make a lot of decisions about housing, 10,000 homes in a period of time without the infrastructure to support it, to propose private-public partnerships, to give the electorate an opportunity to participate in solving the problems that we're facing. We'll probably be there. And then I want to ask a question. I want to make one more statement, then I'll ask a question. Javiera, you made the point that you're listening to a lot of loud voices, and that's what happens in politics. Stay tuned, because you're going to hear a lot of loud voices with the participation of these people and the thing through the Leesville Road Coalition. You're going to hear a lot of loud voices, I hope, and I hope you all get involved. And then I have one last question. And I'm glad, Doug, that you're taking notes. I'd like to see a show of hands of how many people in this room would prefer sidewalks and bicycle paths on 70, or how many in this room would prefer to have a limited access freeway that gives us, according to federal standards, less pollution, fewer accidents per mile, and more public safety. Well, I just want the vote of which one you want, because we're hearing, no, do you want, okay, fair enough. How many of you would like to see sidewalks and bicycle lanes as an alternative to freeways, a limited access freeway? Show of hands? Oh, I've seen none. And those of you that would prefer a freeway, limited access freeway for bicycle paths and sidewalks, can I see a show of hands? Okay, so there's some data. And
Herman, you voted twice. Your hand was up for both questions.
That's because I'm so short, I couldn't tell if you could see me. That's another story. All right, with that, I want to thank everyone that came here. You know, it's one thing to sit and complain. It's one thing to point fingers at our city government, our county government, and our officials, state officials, and the MPO, but they came here to listen to you. So please, let's be appreciative. Thank you. And I wish you all a good night, and thank you.